Three's the Charm by MissCHSparkles, Chapter 18. Ron had no idea how long they'd been there, but he didn't care. Dumbledore had announced that Professor Quirrell had been forced to leave due to an accident, and so defence lessons would be cancelled that week. He assured them that they would be getting a substitute teacher very soon, and hopefully a more permanent replacement before long. So, really, they were only missing potions. They could go to herbology after class. They hadn't really talked. Harry didn't feel up to it, but the silence wasn't unbearable. It was a beautiful day, and it was nice to just lie there, relaxing in the sun. At some point during a couple or so hours they were there, Harry fell asleep, lulled by the peace of the autumn day. Neither Ron nor Hermione bothered to wake him up. He'd probably need all the sleep he could get. Ron could only hope Harry could find a way to cope with Cedric's reappearance, or there would be problems. Not least because Harry would probably end up having horrible nightmares and difficulty sleeping, which would only be the start. Harry felt like he needed to be in control, and if he felt like he was losing control, he would suffer a bit of a mental breakdown. There was so much pressure on all three of them, but Harry would have the most pressure. He had defeated Voldemort once, and now he had to do it all over again. Ron sighed and glanced down at the parchment in front of him, quill in hand. For the last half hour or so, he had been trying to think about what to write to Ginny. He had remembered his promise to write, and now was as good a time as any to start doing it. It was just a question of starting it. He considered the paper before dipping the quill and starting to write. Dear Ginny, see, I did send you a letter. Bet you thought I wouldn't. Bet it's quiet at the Burrow without all of us there. At least we'll see each other at Christmas. That's not very far away, is it? Okay, I know you probably want me to go to the good stuff, so I will. As Percy has no doubt informed you, I got sorted into Gryffindor, along with Harry and Hermione. You'll remember them, won't you? I'm only kidding, Gin. Obviously you'll remember them, especially Harry. Who is single, by the way. Joking. Well, we're still friends, and I'm hoping that both can visit our home at some point. They live with muggles, so they've had no idea how wizards live. Can you imagine that? Anyway, not much to say about lessons yet, although they're better than I expected. You know, I was the second person in Transfiguration to turn a match into a needle. I can't believe it. I thought I'd be rubbish at that stuff, but I'm not. By the way, watch out for Snape, the potions teacher. Everything that Bill told you about is true. Even the picking on students bit. Ask Fred and George if you don't believe me. My Hemper went down really well. You should do one yourself next year. You and Mum can do that. You'd definitely have a head start on me. The food here is great. Not quite as good as Mum's, but no one's better than Mum. The feasts are the best, and I can't wait for the Halloween feast. I've heard there's going to be lots of puddings. Save up your pocket money for the train ride, Ginny. They had loads of great sweets. How are things going at the Burrow? Anything new happening? Let me know if there are. I don't care what it is. I don't have much more to say, I'm afraid. The spells and things we're learning are really basic stuff. If you've got any questions, I'm sure you can put them together in your letter. I'm using Harry's owl, Hedwig. I'll make sure she hangs around long enough for you to write a letter, but don't be surprised if she steals the bacon. Really missing you. Love, Ron. What are you doing? Hermione asked curiously. She had been buried in a book while Harry slept between them. Writing to Ginny, he answered casually. I promised I would. The twins never bother writing, and Percy's letters were too pompous. Oh, that's really good, Hermione beamed. I wish I could write to her, but I don't know her yet. She wouldn't mind if you wrote to her something, Harry said reasonably. Or if Harry did. She'd adore that. Hermione considered this before exclaiming, Maybe that's exactly what Harry should do. As he looked at her, she explained, You remember how she was with him? She came across so shy, and Harry didn't really know what to do. If they could write to each other, she could get to know him, and it wouldn't be so awkward when they met up. They could become friends. That might work, Ron said. It was so simple, yet they hadn't even thought of it. Then again, Hermione was very good at coming up with ideas like that. At least it would distract Ginny from the fact that she was the only Weasley child left at the Burrow. Hermione smiled before saying, "She'll certainly be less jealous of you if we write." "Jealous of me?" Ron exclaimed, completely taken aback. When had beloved Ginny ever been jealous of him? He wasn't like all his brothers who had achieved things worthy of being jealous of. "Of how easily you made friends," she explained. "She told me that she was always jealous of how the three of us just seemed to click instantly." "But we didn't," Ron said slowly, remembering the troll incident. "To her, it seemed like we did." Hermione reasoned. "You made friends with Harry on the train the very first day, and then I became your friend only a couple of months at school. It took her a lot longer to make those friends, and she always envied how close we were." Ron considered this. Hermione added, "There were also all the adventures we went on. Even if people didn't know the whole story, they still got the gist of what we were up to. Imagine how you'd feel if some of your siblings did half the things we did, and if you only ever heard a quarter of it." "I'd never thought about that," Ron mumbled, thinking of how jealous he was when Bill and Charlie went off to do exciting things. He never realized that Ginny was jealous of him. She always seemed rather scathing of him. She had a tendency of only giving it to him straight when he was messing up somehow, and she would appear to be far too amazed when he did something right. Hermione now smiled and said, "It's really sweet that you're trying to make her feel better." "Thanks. I don't want to repeat any of the mistakes I made," he said with a wry smile. "Me and Ginny used to be the best friends, but I always got annoyed when she got away with stuff that I didn't. The twins never seemed to pick on her either." With a very sympathetic look on her face, Hermione took his hand and squeezed it. Feeling strangely confident, Ron continued, "We played a lot together, if our brothers were too busy for us. We'd, hunt fairies in the garden, brew potions in the kitchen, with whatever we could find." Hermione giggled at this, but not in a mocking way, more of a delighted way. "We also used to make magic wands," Ron continued, enjoying how Hermione was leaning against him. "We'd imitate Mum when she used hers, or try spells we heard the others talking about. Bill would sometimes tell us about jinxes and curses he knew, and we'd try to copy them." "Sounds good," Hermione murmured softly, as she seemed to be even closer. "Yeah, it was fun," Ron said with a shrug, adding shyly, "Better than lessons." Hermione made a sound of fond exasperation, and he grinned, leaning in himself. His eyes started to close slightly, and his own eyes slowly closed as well. As they raised their lips towards each other, "Potter! Weasley! What are you doing?" With a gasp, Hermione flinched backwards, and Ron resisted the urge to swear loudly. Turning around, he saw that Snape was striding towards them, black robes billowing madly. Ron groaned. Of all the teachers to come looking for them, it had to be Snape. "And what do we have here?" Snape said silkily, glaring down at them while Harry slept, oblivious. "Three little Gryffindor first years who think they are so superior to everyone that they can skip out on 2 classes. I thought defense was cancelled," Ron couldn't help but point out. 10 points from Gryffindor for insolence," Snape said instantly. "Take care to explain why you felt unable to attend my classes." "Because you're a git," was the answer Ron wanted to give, but instead allowed Hermione to answer. "Please, sir, Harry had a panic attack, and he couldn't face class. We thought it best to stay with him until he recovered." "Recovered?" Ron sneered, looking down his hooked nose at Harry. "It looks to me that Mr. Potter preferred to nap over studying." "You only fell asleep a short while ago," Hermione said earnestly. "Sir, he's been having horrible flashbacks to the night his parents died." "Ha! That'll get him," Ron thought smugly, as Snape's sneer turned into an ugly grimace. "Don't be ridiculous, Miss Granger," Snape said curtly. "How could Potter have a flashback? He was barely 1 year old when it happened." But he does remember something, sir, Hermione said quietly. A flash of green light, a pain on his forehead, and laughter. Horrible, horrible laughter, sir. An odd look crossed Snape's face. Hermione had just perfectly described an attack by Voldemort. Seeing her advantage, Hermione pressed on. Ever since Harry found out about how his parents died, he's been thinking about them quite a bit, imagining how they must have died. And now we've just come face to face with the monster who killed them. It affected Harry more than he thought, especially now that he looks what his parents looked like. Especially now that he knows what his parents looked like. She finished quietly, shooting Harry a sad look. And he needed a both of you here to hold his hand? Snape asked coldly. No, but we wanted to be with him, Ron said hotly. He told us to go to class, but we didn't want to go without him. How touching, Snape said contemptuously. Perhaps we should ask, Potter! The last word was said in half a shout, making Harry jerk and sit up, a photograph slipping through his fingers. Before he'd fallen asleep, he'd been looking through some of the new photographs he had been given, particularly the ones he hadn't seen the first time around. Snape's eyes followed it, and narrowed as he saw that it was a Muggle photo of Lily. Harry rubbed his face, pushing his glasses up, before blinking up at Snape in some confusion. Sir? He questioned, a little bemused about what had happened. You and your sidekicks missed class, Snape said without preamble, staring hard at Harry. Care to explain why? Harry frowned before looking away, in the direction of the lake. He suddenly seemed very tired, and a lot older than his 11-year-old body suggested. You ever wonder, sir, what life might have been like if certain people had lived? Harry frowned. Ron frowned. Harry must really be down if he was answering honestly like that. Not that he'd always lie to people like Snape, but he wasn't usually that candid. He almost never admitted that things were deeply affecting him. Grimly, Ron knew they'd have to throw themselves into a new project, something for Harry to focus his abilities on, while getting used to the idea of Cedric being alive and blissfully unaware. There is no point in wondering, Snape says scathingly, which made Ron silently scoff. He might not be the best at feelings, but even he knew that Snape had probably spent a long time wondering what could have been. When people die, they die, and that is the end to it. Harry's lips twitched into a more ironic smile as he said, Is that really true, sir? I've never known my parents, but I still think about them. I still love them and want them to be proud of me. They're dead, and yet they're still out there. He could be wrong, but Ron thought Snape looked a little bit uncomfortable. To the untrained eye, Snape looked as he always did, sour and sneering, but Ron was sure Snape was affected by Harry's speech, if only a little. There was a pause, and then Snape said curtly, Be that as it may, the three of you have missed my class, and will receive detention. Harry nodded, readily accepting this. If you are feeling up to it, Snape now said sarcastically, you will go to lunch, and then proceed to your next class without delay. Also, you will write an essay 2 feet long. Also, you will write an extra 2 feet on the essay I assigned this morning. We will, sir, Harry promised, shifting and getting to his feet. Ron and Hermione copying. Snape's eyes fell on the potion book Hermione had been reading, and then he grumbled something under his breath. Well, get going, he snapped. You will not be using the excuse that you felt a bit too faint to attend classes. You shall receive notification of your detention later today. Yes, Professor, they all said before heading towards the castle, Snape following them in case they decided to disobey. Where have you been, Ron? Percy demanded as soon as they entered the Great Hall and came over to the Gryffindor table. It seemed others had mentioned their absence from potions. About, Ron said evasively as Fred said, I can't believe you skipped Snape's class of all things. Yeah, he's probably going to cut you up for ingredients, teased George. It's been nice knowing you, little bro. Fred said in a mock serious voice as Percy scowled. It's not funny, he snapped. Ron, you should never skip class. Never. What if I'm ill? Ron couldn't help but ask, causing Percy's ears to go red. Use your common sense, Ron. I thought you were going to act more appropriately at school, especially with the good reports I have received from Professor McGonagall. Percy said seriously, shoulders back as he stared at Ron in disapproval. I'm not going to repeat it, Ron said in exasperation as the twins made noises of disappointment. Look, this was something important, but it won't happen again, Percy. You don't have to worry. Just what was so important that you had to miss potions? Percy demanded. Ron couldn't help but grimace at Harry, before slightly saying, Look, it's nothing for you to worry about, Percy. Okay? Ron, I want to know, Percy began, but George interrupted. Leave him be, Percy. They're wanting to get their lunch. Percy huffed, but allowed them to settle down. The expression on his face, however, suggested that he wasn't going to let the subject drop completely. Ron ignored him and started helping himself to lunch, as Harry looked a little concerned. Everything okay? He asked quietly. Yeah, it's not a big deal, Ron assured him, already munching on a piece of cottage pie. By the way, that's one of my favourites too. That stuff's yummy. If you're sure, Harry said. He didn't want a rift to grow between Ron and his brothers. The rest of the day was fairly ordinary. They went to herbology after class, and then to dinner. In the middle of it, when the great hall was packed, Dumbledore stood up and waved for silence. As you are all aware, Professor Quirrell has met with a tragic accident and will not be able to continue teaching, Dumbledore said gravely. No one really moved. Quirrell hadn't even been teaching a month, and coupled with his nervous stammer, he wasn't going to be missed much. In a slightly more cheerful tone, Dumbledore said, However, I am delighted to say that we have a temporary defence teacher, who some of you might recognise. He gestured to his right, and a man with a neatly trimmed beard and beret waved. Harry recognised him as the art teacher, but had never taken a class, so hadn't interacted with him. As far as he was aware, he was a good teacher, who everyone seemed to like. Those who had taken his class, that is. Professor Perunio has kindly agreed to substitute until we have a more permanent teacher for the post. Which means defence classes will be running from tomorrow, I'm afraid. He said the last part with a twinkle as a few students looked rather disappointed. That's all. Enjoy the rest of your lunch, he said jovially, sitting back down again. I'm glad we've got a new teacher, Hermione said in relief. And we've never had him before. This should be interesting. It's different, Harry agreed, and Ron knew what he meant. After some rather useless and boring defence lessons, this new teacher would definitely be a refreshing change. And maybe it would take Harry's mind off things. Dear Diary, you remember how I wrote that Ron was doing better than I imagined? Well, I'm not so sure about that now, even though he is still getting good reports from his teachers. This morning he skipped potions, and if defence hadn't been cancelled, probably would have skipped that too. What worries me is that he won't say why he skipped class, but it's clearly something to do with Harry Potter. The boy seems harmless enough, very polite, and appears to be quite intelligent. But I don't know. There's something about his eyes. I don't know what it is, but I do know I don't want to see it in other students' eyes. That is something I've occasionally spotted in Ron's eyes ever since he had that nightmare. Ron has changed, and I thought it meant he was taking responsibility, trying to be more adult now that he is going to Hogwarts. But now I'm not so sure. I have no idea what this all could mean, but I am worried that Harry, or even Hermione Granger, might be a bad influence on my brother. How, I do not know. Ron has been achieving good marks, and even defended me against the twins, which I can't complain about. But to skip class, completely out of the blue, and for no good reason? I believe I should keep a closer eye on my little brother. I won't write to Mother and Father about this, not unless Ron skips again, but I will take action if he continues to change. Percival Weasley. I can't believe how messy that was, Hermione said as they headed for defence against the dark arts. It was Wednesday, and the trio had just finished herbology, which had involved mixing a lot of smelly manure and compost to create fertiliser. A lot of girls had been squealing over handling the dirt and dung, although Harry had to admit just as well they wore protective gloves. Neville looked like he had enjoyed it, a rare moment of seeing him fairly relaxed in a classroom setting. Harry hoped this new teacher would be a good one. It would be nice to see Neville enjoy a class that wasn't herbology. Although he actually did quite well in charms. Professor Flitwick was so cheerful, and charms was a fun subject. Nearly everyone was having a good time. It wasn't that bad, Ron said, unconcerned, as he flicked a bit of dried dirt from his robes. Lavender would disagree, Hermione said with a small laugh, listening as said girl complained loudly to Parvati up ahead. Pfft! She didn't have detention with Snape, Ron retorted casually, making Hermione smile wryly. Snape had made them prepare some of the most disgusting ingredients imaginable the previous night, which had included skinning, gutting, disemboweling, decapitating, and various other things, including pulling slimy gloop out with their hands. It had been very disgusting, but compared to other detentions, rather tame. Snape was obviously trying to pull them to the idea of ever doing anything to earn detention ever again, and Harry had to admit, to a normal first year, it would be very effective. The other Gryffindors had been very curious as to why they'd skived off Snape's class, but they'd managed to deflect questions so far. Some people seemed to think they were acting arrogant because of how well they'd been doing in class, while others thought they were simply being daring. However, since they'd been punished with such a seemingly unpleasant detention, no one was holding a grudge. They dutifully filed into class, taking their seats and waiting for their new teacher to appear. He didn't keep them long, but swept into the room with a sweep of his dark red cloak, complete with matching beret. "Good morning, children. How are you this fine day?" he asked with a clear accent. Everyone replied, a little unsure, as he was an unknown. He chuckled before saying, "Forgive me. My classes are a lot more, shall we say, casual, as they are not part of the main curriculum. You do not achieve an NEWT or OWL grade, but you do receive a certificate detailing your achievements. So if any of you are tempted to take this class in third year," he broke off, chuckling as he says, "but I am getting ahead of myself, trying to entice prospective future students to my course, when I have not even introduced myself." Drawing himself up, he said proudly, "I am Professor Jean-Baptiste Peruno, your temporary defense teacher. I achieved a fair grade on this subject while my lessons might not impart I received a fair grade on this subject, so while my lessons might only impart very basic information, it is better than nothing. No?" Harry was smiling. Professor Pomperuno seemed like a genuine person, unlike Umbridge, who had been sugary sweetness itself. "I have been thinking how best to teach you," Peruno continued, gesturing slightly with his wand. "And since I know a lot about art and a little about defense, why not combine them?" He waved his wand and covered an easel suddenly flew forward, its sheet lifting up to reveal a beautifully painted unicorn. As some students watched in awe, the unicorn suddenly tossed its head and seemed to look straight at them. It then kicked its back legs before galloping around its frame, becoming smaller and then larger as necessary. "Cool, sir!" Dean exclaimed, being a talented artist himself. He loved this. The boys were in awe of the magic, while the girls loved the picture of such a beautiful animal. Even the trio were pretty impressed. Looking very pleased, Peruno said, "I have had this piece for a couple of years. I managed to see a unicorn in the forest and painted." Waggling a finger at them, he said, "I had Hagrid with me on that occasion, and it is forbidden for you to enter the forest. However, if any of you take care of magical creatures, you will be introduced to unicorns at some point." This certainly made a few girls take note, which amused Harry. None of them had any idea that not all the magical creatures they'd be meeting would be beautiful or harmless, but they'd learn soon enough. Now Peruno was beaming as he said, "Of course, I'm not showing you this picture to show off. It is an example of what you all will be doing." As everyone gasped in surprise, he said, "You will all be learning how to draw and paint your own magical creature, which will be animated at the end." This caused excited muttering as he added, "Of course, for homework, you will need to be researching your assigned animal, and I shall expect a little report of its particulars. I am hoping this will occupy you until a more qualified teacher presents itself." "You're really going to teach us how to paint like that?" Parvati asked in awe. "I will try," Purunu said modestly. "But remember, this is just for fun and a little lesson in research for you, and perhaps a not-so-subtle attempt to entice you towards art. But come, we are losing precious time. Let us begin." He waved his wand and their desks were flown to the side of the room, while different easels and stools replaced them. Each easel had a supply of pencils, charcoal, paint, and various art materials. Purunu summoned an easel for himself and began to show them how to get started. He told them they weren't going to work on their creature today, but first learn how to properly work with paint. Once they were more confident, they could move on to how to enchant their paintings to move. At the end of the lesson, everyone had painted something, Richardine's being the best, of course. Purunu then offered around a floating hat, which they each had take a slip of paper, which would show them their designated magical creature. Harry took his and almost laughed out loud. A Hungarian horntail! Well, he'd have no trouble imagining what that one looked like. "For your homework, you must research your chosen animal," Purunu said enthusiastically as the bell went. "Find out how they move, how they act, and most importantly, you must bring an image of the animal. Off you go now." "That was good," Harry said to his friends as they left. "Don't know if I'm much of an artist, though." "Same here," Ron said with a shrug. "But it's different. But did you see what I got?" he added with disgust, brandishing his slip of paper, which said Acromantula. "Look at mine," Hermione said, showing her slip, which said Nindu. "It's meant to be one of the deadliest animals there is. Thank goodness it's native to Africa." "Don't say that," Ron groaned. "The blasted thing will probably turn up now." "I don't think so," Hermione said with a smile. "It's very difficult to track down and impossible to control." Ron just made a scathing noise, glaring at his slip. Of all the things he had to paint, why did it have to be this thing? Harry just laughed before saying, "Think I'll do something similar with the other ears." "Probably. But it would have to be more defense-based for the odd ears," Hermione reasoned, "especially the NEWT students. They'd need to be studying curses and defense spells. But perhaps he's having them draw out the movements, what the curses look like, and perhaps their effects. I wouldn't mind him teaching him that instead of this," Ron stated, waving his paper around in frustration as his friends laughed. However, what none of them noticed was a figure watching them worriedly from just around the corner. A figure with horn-rimmed spectacles. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Percy has the diary? Okay, that's new. Honestly, I can definitely see Riddle's charm working on him. Ron did compare Percy to Riddle before they knew he was Voldemort. So, yeah, that tracks. And I love Ron standing up to Snape. Just the whole bit last chapter of him being Harry's brother, beautiful. Him standing up to all of his other brothers so that he doesn't have to say what Harry saw. Beautiful. Oh, and the little bit between him and Hermione almost kissing. Because their bodies might be small, but the feelings are still there. Aww, cute. And this art teacher seems fascinating. I'm not much of an artist, but I've recently started teaching myself how to embroider. I've got several embroidery hoops that teach you different sewing techniques, and I've just started what's called these flat needle stitch. It looks like a beautiful swirl on the fabric. I'm definitely going to use that. I'm thinking of getting several of my summer dresses and decorating them. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.